All right, folks, time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we are talking about the Eastern Theater Manassas to Fredericksburg, basically the first 2 years of fighting. One quick note on the names of battlefields. You'll kind of hear me refer to two different ones talking about the same battle, and that's because the Union and the Confederacy called them different things. The South tended to name it after the city that was closest. So Manassas is named after a town called Manassas that was close. Fredericksburg, named after a town that is close to Fredericksburg. The North tended to name it after geographic features. So, for example, Manassas to them is Bull Run. Bull Run being the name of a creek that is close to it. Antietam is another example of a battle that's kind of named after a creek, Antietam Creek. And so just kind of keep that in mind. If you hear me using different words for the same battlefield, same battle, that's why. So Eastern Theater, Bull Run, or Manassas. Basically, the Union's goal is to threaten Richmond. If you remember our map from before, Richmond would be, halfway down Virginia here. So maybe, depending on how big your screen is, maybe an inch or so below the black star that you see where the battlefield is. So the Union's trying to threaten Richmond. Interesting feature about the Battle of Bull Run specifically is that it was a social event. A bunch of people from Washington, D.C. actually made picnic lunches and went out to watch the battlefield, sat on the hillside and watched the guys fight. And the reason why is because they thought that this was going to be the entire war. They kind of thought, well, we're going to fight one battle and then it's going to be over, and we want to be there when the history is made. And you'll see here in a minute that they actually make a much bigger mess than you might think. So the Union had superior numbers, and they had begun in the Battle of Bull Run to beat the Confederates. And so it was kind of looking like the spectators might get what they wanted, and then a general by the name of Thomas Jackson stands his ground. This is where he gets his most famous nickname, Stonewall Jackson. Allegedly, somebody saw him and said, "Look, there's Jackson standing like a stone wall." And his brigade got renamed the Stonewall Brigade. It was a high honor to be in the Stonewall Brigade. The Confederate soldiers were very proud of that. But anyway, the Union was winning. However, they were getting sloppy. Jackson stands his ground basically no matter what. And the Union attack kind of falls apart, and then he leads a counterattack. Also, just quick note, Stonewall Jackson inducted into the Bearded Wonder Legends Only Club for his epic beard, but I digress. So the Confederates, unfortunately for them, fortunately for those of us that are glad that slavery eventually was ended by this war, don't follow through. The spectators that went out to watch the battlefield actually blocked the soldiers from using the roads. Running back to Washington, D.C., there are some historians who think that had the South actually followed up, they might have won. So it's a small victory for the Confederacy. Could have been a lot bigger, although history doesn't work that way. We can't change what happened. All we can do is talk about what did. For the next year, basically, the Confederate wins every battle that they fight in the Eastern Theater. It's really bad if you're a fan of the Union, it's just not going your way at all. And if you remember, this is even worse because the Confederate goal is to get the Union to stop fighting, and especially those numbers 2 and 3, that Northern sympathy and international support. It's a lot easier to get support when you're a winner. And so the South there were a lot of Northerners that wanted to stop fighting. Why are we having all these people die for something that's not really doing anything, and everything else like that? And so by the time we get to Antietam, it's getting kind of critical for the North to win something. So the Confederacy, you can see the black star here, is trying to attack Washington, D.C. They're kind of going for a knockout blow here, attacking the North. At Antietam Creek, the Union actually took the bridges, and they were holding the bridges, and those bridges were choke points. which is a huge tactical or strategic advantage. Antietam has the distinction of being the bloodiest day of the war, single day of fighting. The most people got most casualties, deaths, and wounded. The Confederacy withdraws from Antietam Creek, but the casualty numbers are actually very similar. And the Union doesn't really get a whole lot because they don't really stop much, but it is technically kind of a tie. But even a tie is better than what they had been doing in the last year. And so a tie was a big deal for the Union. You can see there we're going to give each side a tiny little star. And the Union is excited about that apparently, but in all seriousness, when you think about the overall strategies of the war, it is a big deal for the Union to just not lose something. And so we move on from Antietam. A couple of months later, we have the most lopsided battle of the Civil War, and it's Fredericksburg in 1862. You can see it here on our map. So the Confederacy's trying to leave Richmond, kind of go up to threaten Washington, D.C. again. They're trying to go for that knockout blow. And the Union chooses literally almost the worst place to attack. If we look at our map here, so you see Burnside here on the right, that's the Union soldiers, and Lee here on the left, that's the Confederate soldiers. It's a little hard to tell on this map, but it was a big lopsided, and we'll explain here in a second. But first, let's talk about Burnside. Yep, that's where you get the term sideburns from. They called these lovely things that are hanging off of the side of this man's cheeks Burnside's sideburns. And so continuing our facial hair theme for our lesson today. So Burnside basically decides to go across these bridges while being attacked by Confederate cannons. And so you have the Confederates here, and they're sitting up on this hill. You see those kind of shaded areas. So they're way up on a hill, shooting cannons at people as they walk across two bridges, which makes it pretty easy to kind of aim at the same spot and keep killing new soldiers. Not a fun thing to do. And then once you get across the river, you have to run straight up the side of a hill for a mile to kind of get to the Confederate soldiers. And after that, the enemy soldiers were actually positioned behind a stone wall and had spent time digging ditches behind the wall, and because they had gotten to the battlefield a little bit earlier than the Union soldiers had. And so we had a situation like this. You can see the wall and then the trench there. It makes it really, really hard to kill an enemy soldier. And so, as you can imagine, basically the battlefield is just covered with Union soldiers. The casualty lists, it's like 5 times as many Union soldiers as Confederate. That's just not something that you see. It's a major, major defeat for the Union Army, and a major kind of, fortunately it's wintertime, or getting to be wintertime, and so while Robert E. Lee might have asked for Christmas just to get Burnside to be his opponent for the rest of the war, it doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, Fredericksburg gets Burnside fired. His facial hair is not enough to save his job. And so on we go. But that's kind of the first 2 years of the Eastern Theater. 1862 draws to a close. It's definitely looking pretty good for the Confederates in 1862 in the Eastern Theater. Next time we'll talk about the Western Theater, kind of catch you up on what was going on there. That's it for today. Hope you have a nice day.